there's an entire chapter in the book on the architecture of a nuclear weapon-free world, and it's a little bit wonky, so I don't want to talk too much about it, but it is really trying to envision and I'm not the only author who's written about this, but not many have. This is something that I hope in the next decade policy wonks are going to begin to tackle, is to try to envision the mechanisms of verification and adjudication and enforcement that we will have to invent in order to bring about, both to bring about and maintain a nuclear weapon-free world. And then there is another chapter called How It Might Happen, transforming nuclear weapons abolition from a utopian fantasy into a concrete political goal. And I'm not going to pretend that I have sort of the answer to that question, or the only answer to that question. And there's some really wonky stuff in that chapter too about Article 8 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty and mechanisms at the United Nations for really getting the diplomatic momentum going to begin envisioning and negotiating not just a nuclear weapons abolition, but what we wonks in the field call a nuclear weapons elimination convention. There's already a draft of such a convention out there. But I think the big truth that, and I sort of hinted at this at the outset, that we have to grasp about bringing about a nuclear weapon-free world is that it is only people, it is only citizen power that can really make it happen. Look, there's a lot of other issues, and I care about a lot of other issues, and there's a lot of other causes for us to work on, but this is a cause that is somewhat in eclipse right now. This is not part of my speech, but I guess I'll just share it with you. I almost got arrested. I've been arrested a couple times for political protest, and I almost got arrested about 3 weeks ago in front of the White House. It was the group called Veterans for Peace, and they were out there, beautiful. There was a big snowstorm coming down, and it just made us all feel so alive, and when we're protesting the wars, Iraq and Afghanistan. And I'm all for trying to find a way to bring about an expeditious end to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And Veterans for Peace was the main convener. There's a group called Code Pink. There's a group called United for Peace and Justice. And I was all for them, and I just barely missed getting arrested. But the nuclear question wasn't part of that arena at all. I mean, here's the peace movement, such as it is today, and trying to bring about an end to the wars that my country is currently taking place in. And I'm all for that, but I think there ought to be more of a movement about the possibility of nuclear war coming about by accident or miscalculation, or the possibility of a nuclear terror attack. And so that is what this chapter is about, the How It Might Happen chapter. And I lay out in there, and this is hardly original to me, but all the arenas in just in American history, such as the abolition of slavery, such as giving women the right to vote, such as giving workers the right to organize, such as civil rights for people of color. All these great episodes of progress that have taken place in American history, all of them came about because people demanded them and agitated for them and moved for them. And it turns out, and I won't belabor this too much because I think the chapter is pretty good on this, it turns out that that has also been the case in the nuclear arena as well, on at least 2 occasions. Let me quickly tell you about them. The first one was in the 1950s and 60s when a real movement, a citizens' movement, arose against what? Against what Shannon shared with us, against nuclear testing in the atmosphere. Because you know what? Praise the Lord, there ain't no more Lejean-Ecnolons on planet Earth today, because atmospheric tests have been banned for nearly half a century now. It was the the limited test ban treaty, the comprehensive test ban treaty would ban all tests. That hasn't happened yet. It is still not illegal to conduct underground nuclear tests, but for virtually half a century, tests above ground, atmospheric tests, have not taken place anymore. Why? Because for about 10 years, there were citizen marches and movements, and very prominent people like Norman Cousins and Albert Schweitzer and Albert Einstein and Linus Pauling worked to demand that governments ban nuclear testing in the atmosphere. And the reason there ain't no more Lejeune-Eknalongs on planet Earth today is because we made that happen. And the second episode of it is the nuclear freeze movement in the early 1980s. I told you about those episodes in 1983, and I told you the tensions were high between the Soviet Union and the United States, and people were, and besides the tensions being high, the arms race was just escalating, a spiral. Every year we would build hundreds and hundreds of more deployed nuclear warheads. And the phrase that Don and I will remember was, you know, last year we could destroy the world 77 times over, and now we can destroy the world 177 times over. It all just had this madness to it that even the most casual observer could grasp. And so there was this nuclear freeze movement that just said, stop, just freeze it. Just stop this ever-accelerating arms race. And many people were deeply involved in the nuclear freeze movement. Again, I got gray hair, but you know, I was a kid. I was in college then, but I was aware of it. Many people were really involved in it, but years later I got to know this woman who was one of, if not the chief organizer. Her name was Randall Carolyn Forsberg. She won a MacArthur Genius Award for her efforts, and the nuclear freeze movement reached its zenith in this city on June 12, 1982, when 1 million people gathered in Central Park, just a few blocks from here, I guess, right? Is it 110th Street? Is that where Central Park ends? Yeah, so it was in the Midtown area, I guess. Did you call that Midtown? In the 70s, right? That's where the rally was. 1 million people gathered in Central Park, and they said, stop the nuclear arms race. And Randall Carolyn Forsberg died very young, maybe about 3 or 4 years ago, only in her mid-60s. And the obituary in the New York Times said that day, that time, this place was the single biggest political demonstration in American history. That's something to be proud of, huh? Especially because it worked. It worked. The nuclear policies of the second Reagan administration didn't bring us abolition, but were radically different from the nuclear policies of the first Reagan administration. They stopped talking about waging and winning a nuclear war. They actually began to engage in arms control negotiations with the Soviets, not just to limit the size, not just to freeze the arms race, but to actually reduce nuclear arsenals. And Reagan goes to Geneva, his very first meeting with Mikhail Gorbachev, the brand new Soviet General Secretary, and he utters this sentence: a nuclear war cannot be won, and a nuclear war must never be fought. And that sentence was dramatically different than the kind of stuff that Ronald Reagan was saying during his first term. And you know why Ronald Reagan uttered that sentence? Because we made him utter that sentence. Because the nuclear freeze movement forced him to articulate that kind of sentiment. And now, and that's what this chapter is about all the times that people power has moved history, and indeed has, I think, saved us from some nuclear calamity. And I think the most important thing to point out is that, praise the Lord, 65 years have gone by and none of these things have gone wrong yet. I don't think we can keep them around forever without something eventually going wrong, but I think one of the reasons that we haven't had a nuclear war in 65 years is because the anti-nuclear movement arose virtually immediately after the dawn of the nuclear age and said, this is something that we oppose, and this is something that cannot stand, and this is something that needs to come to an end. And now, my friends, it is time to build a movement, not just for bringing an end to nuclear testing, not just for freezing an arms race that is accelerating ever out of control. Now is the time to build a movement for bringing an end to the age of nuclear weapons forever. That is why I am here tonight, and that is the cause that I ask you to devote a little bit of your blood, toil, tears, and sweat toward. And let me just say, I'm going to wrap up now in a minute. Let me do a quick little commercial. For the group that I am with, there are many groups that work on these issues. Susan mentioned it's a little tricky. I'm a fellow with a group called International Physicians Preventing Nuclear War, won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1985, have chapters in 57 countries, and the American chapter, which as you might guess is in many ways the most important, since this is the most important and most powerful nuclear weapon state, is called Physicians for Social Responsibility. And it turns out that PSR, we call ourselves, is really reviving its operations in New York City. And you don't have to be a physician. I mean, in theory, it's funded by physicians and led by physicians who care about the fate of the human race. But you certainly don't have to be a physician or even remotely in the medical field. So I just want to throw that out. It turns out that next, I'm not sure what the date is, January 19th, PSR New York City is trying to sort of reconstitute a chapter to really take the lead in the nuclear disarmament movement here in New York City. And if you want, you can just write your name and an email down. Maybe somebody forgot to do this, Susan, just put out a piece of paper or something. Or you can just send an email to you ready? psrnyc@gmail.com. It's actually a Columbia Medical School professor named Andrew Cantor, who's the head of the PSR New York City chapter. So that's one very direct way to get involved here in New York in this cause. Give me your email address or just shoot an email to psrnyc@gmail.com and become involved either with this group, PSR, or with some other group that is working to bring about a nuclear weapon-free world, and hopefully even larger, the vision of a world ultimately without war itself. Two more things and then I will close. I would like to say that to me, talked a lot about the dangers, but to me, people sometimes ask, sorry, let me start over again. The book's been out for about 6 months, and I'm pleased. I've had a good number of radio interviews about it. I'm pleased about that, maybe 30. And often, not always, but often, the host asks a question, so what brought you into this? What is this really about for you? And what really led you to choose this cause as opposed to something else? And I had to think about it a little bit. I mean, I didn't have a quick flip answer to that question, but I've actually, off the air, I sort of thought a little about it. And I guess I would just like to close by sharing it with you. It seems to me that the nuclear peril, and in fact the dawn of the nuclear age, 65 years ago, 66 years ago this summer it will be, has both cosmological consequences and chronological consequences. And here's what I mean by that. We live on planet Earth, and again, I hope that 100 years from now, most people on planet Earth think of themselves first and foremost as Earthlings, and I reiterate that I think the International House here in New York City is one of the leading edges of building that ethos for the 21st century. But of course, planet Earth exists in a much larger arena, our galaxy and our universe. And you've probably heard it said, and this is a very simple but profound observation that I certainly didn't invent, I just heard it, which is that there's only two possibilities. One is that we're not alone in the universe, and they're out there. There are other sentient beings, intelligent civilizations, and we live in a galactic community, and perhaps someday we will become a part of a galactic community. Or we may be alone. I mean, I am no scientist or astrophysicist, but there's a body of opinion among astrophysicists that says that it may well be the case. It is far from impossible that we still don't really understand how life arose. And because we don't understand it, we know that it is far from impossible that for life itself to arise and then for life to evolve from primitive blue-green algae, which were the first creatures, I believe, that lived on planet Earth. And forgive this tangent, life on planet Earth is about 3.5 billion years old, and for roughly 2.9 billion years of that time, of the 3.5 billion, it was nothing but single cells of blue-green algae floating on the surface of the sea, somehow containing within it the potential to develop into the creatures that we now have become. And it may well be the case that first for life to arise and then for life to evolve into creatures like ourselves, creatures for the universe to be able to become aware of itself and contemplate itself. It may just be such an improbable event that it is possible that it may have happened only once in all the expanse of the universe, in all the 13.7 billion years since the Big Bang. We may be it. In all of space and time, we may be utterly alone. And in this generation, the generation of our parents and grandparents, 5 times in 50 years we came within 3 minutes of having a civilization ending, perhaps an extinction-inducing nuclear war. I mean, talk about stakes being infinite. And so yes, that is half of my real answer to why I work on this. I mean, it is possible that we are utterly alone in all the universe, and it is far from impossible, as I hope I've convinced you tonight, that we could, in the next several decades, literally bring it all to an end. And that would be it. Then there would be nothing left in all the universe except inert matter. I think we can aspire to something better. I think we can aspire, as I've said several times tonight, to abolish nuclear weapons before they abolish us, especially if us is all there ever has been and all there may ever be. So those are the infinite, I don't hesitate to use that word, the infinite cosmological consequences. But it seems to me that there are chronological consequences as well, because the community of humankind, the family of humanity, are not just the 6.8, I believe is the number, 6.8 billion Homo sapiens who happen to be alive tonight on January 11th, 2011. The community of humankind is in fact all those who have gone before us and all those who will come after us. And it seems to me that this is most fundamentally not only our obligation to our descendants, who may or may not ever come into being based on decisions that we make during our lifetimes about this nuclear question and perhaps a few other questions that really put the fate of the human race at stake, but it is also, to me, it's our obligation to our ancestors, my grandparents and their grandparents and their grandparents, who toiled to create the world in which we now live. And so I will now truly close by reading you the closing passage of the opening chapter of Apocalypse Never about our obligations to those who are yet to come and our obligations to those who have given to us the world in which we now live. In the end, the possibility of nuclear apocalypse risks not just the lives of our descendants, but also the legacies of our ancestors. Think about how they toiled to build the art, the science, the civilization that all of us temporarily now enjoy and use and inhabit. Could anything degrade their memories more than to dance with this kind of disaster? The science fiction author Theodore Sturgeon calls upon us to honor, quote, "the main current which created you, and in which you will create a greater thing still, reverencing those who bore you, and the ones who bore them, back and back to the first wild creature who was different, because his heart leaped when he saw a star." End quote. Our imperative to keep ourselves from blowing up our world is our obligation to our vanished predecessors, those who invented writing, and before that language, and before that rational thought itself, the geniuses who took us slowly, step by step by step, from creatures not so very far from our animal origins to something a little bit closer to our destiny. We must abolish nuclear weapons and keep them abolished forever, because that is the debt we owe to Jane Addams and Dorothy Day, Bolivar and Bach, Gutenberg and Galileo, Magellan and Michelangelo, Ashoka and Caesar Augustus. It is our debt to the slaves who sweated, toiled, and perished to build the Great Pyramids, the tallest structures on planet Earth, until the construction of the Eiffel Tower in 1889, considered by their builders to be stairways to heaven, pointing toward the infinite sky. It is our debt to the unnamed Cro-Magnon women and men, your grandparents, who painted those breathtaking landscapes in the Lascaux caves some 200 long centuries ago, and who held in their hearts the barest glimpse of a human destiny of infinite possibility. It is up to us to carry on their work. Thank you very much, my friends. By all means, yes, yes.
So when you ask your questions, just introduce yourself with your name and your country of origin and your field of study. That would be great.
Or you can say you're an earthling.
Or an
And the books, for what it's worth, I'm not only here to sell books, but Susan, $23. Cover price is $25, but I'm selling them for 23 cash or a check made out to me because I bought them and shipped them up here. And I'd be happy to give you an enthusiastic autograph. Or they're available on Amazon.